And good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Baldwin. I am the Access and Inclusion Program Officer here at the Mass Cultural Council. And delighted to have you join us this morning. I know we've got people still filtering in, but we do want to begin because it's a robust hour. Uh, First, I want to thank everyone for coming and invite you to participate in this webinar any way that you can to remain the most engaged. So if you need to sit or lie down or be snacking, please do so. And if you have questions, the Q&A feature is available. And as a reminder, this work that we are presenting in this department, this work that I do for the council rests on the shoulders of many other activists with disabilities. And as a reminder, although there are legal compliance issues, I'm not a lawyer. I'm an enthusiast. And so really thinking about access as the development of an asset is really my course of action. So with all that being said, to address your needs, take care of yourself, reminding that this work is generational and ongoing, we're going to jump right in. And I'm going to move to the second slide. Welcome to ADA 101. A reminder, this is being recorded and it will be put on our YouTube channel. And as always, as I said, take care of yourselves the best way you can to remain fully engaged. There's a whole team of Mass Cultural Council staff behind the scenes, myself, as well as Sarah, Kaylin, Lillian, and Lindiana. Captions are available. These are live captions presented by Partners Interpreting. So thank you, Jessica. If you'd like to follow that, you can click on the closed caption, the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. You can also follow the captions on a separate URL if you would prefer, which has the text modifications that make it a little bit easier to see based on contrast, size, and font. Again, because this is a webinar, we are asking you to submit your questions using the Q&A feature. Some of these questions may be answered live. Sarah will be reading them out loud, and I'm hoping to leave a little time at the end for questions as well. And even after this session is over, I'm available for questions. And so this is really about understanding organizational responsibilities under the ADA. And on this slide, we have an image by the photographer Tom Olin, taken in 1990 during the height of wanting to get the ADA passed. And we have a number of activists who are using wheelchairs at the front of the photo under a banner that states, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And that's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. So today's agenda, we're going to address briefly who we are talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about the compliance and what really you need to know to be the foundation for additional equity work. We'll talk about inclusive by design, which is really that anticipation and responsiveness that makes a competent organization. And I'll list some resources at the end, which we'll make available to everybody as well. Now, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, defines disability in a distinct manner, meaning a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So that could just be getting up the stairs, going grocery shopping, taking care of yourself. So that physical or mental impairment, the record of having that impairment or regarded as having that impairment. This is broad, fairly nuanced. Not all disabilities are apparent. What I think is interesting and must be noted under this definition of disability is that these are just within this law. If you go into the medical insurance world, there are other definitions of disability. So as I like to remind folks, defining who has or who doesn't have a disability. We're not doctors. By sharing how the ADA describes disability, and on this slide, thinking about the numbers. Everyone loves data. So according to the World Health Report from the 2020 census, 58 million Americans identify as having a disability. That's 1 in 5. And certainly in urban areas where there are more resources, it's closer to 1 in 4. Data shows us that 8% of kids under the age of 15 have disabilities. 21% of people 15 and older have disabilities. I think the number at the bottom of the screen here, 50% of adults 65 and older have disabilities. Now, elders may not identify as being disabled, but we know that aging itself is disabling. And because we are at the end of the baby boomer generation, the silver tsunami, as I like to call it, there are 10,000 people turning 65 every day. And that'll be happening until about the year 2040. So it's this reminder that as we're thinking about disability, again, a broad definition, a big population of people. And in the same sort of diagnostic manner, when we think about disabilities, we often get locked into the physical disability that may be represented in the very successful wheelchair icon. But our most common reasons for functional limitations in humans are things like arthritis and back problems and heart disease, respiratory disease. These are things that are not necessarily obvious, particularly when thinking about that blue wheelchair icon. A reminder that not all disabilities are apparent. And that people with disabilities, we're all the ages, we have jobs, we have families, goals and dreams, we're all the colors and sizes and genders. Things to remember, we don't necessarily want or need assistance. We come from a diverse financial backgrounds. So some people who are receiving anti-poverty benefits and some who are not. And as a reminder that people with disabilities don't always identify as a person with a disability. So it's really this whole idea that from toddler to elder, ability is on a spectrum. And it's a very regular human variable. As many of my friends in the disability movement say, you are temporarily able-bodied, because aging and accidents can certainly create both temporary or new disabilities based on how you live your life. All right, so we've identified that anyone could be a person with a disability. So those are the numbers, those are the facts. And we're going to look at the legislation for a little bit here. And a reminder, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an enthusiast. But that the laws around the Americans with Disabilities Act did not pop out of nowhere. They really came from a series of historic legislations for people wanting their rights. We have actions on the West Coast under the independent living movement, actions on the East Coast under Judy Heumann and the hippies at Camp Jejune. But this work has been ongoing, particularly after World War II. You have the Architectural Barriers Act, the Rehab Act of 73, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 75, as well as the ADA in 1990, and amendments that they made in 2010. We can anticipate more amendments based particularly on the digital landscape that we have. And as a reminder, when you've got federal laws and state laws, sometimes they can be different. It can be confusing when thinking about, am I following the Americans with Disabilities Act? Am I addressing Section 504 of the Rehab Act? And then the state may see something different. I always like to say, just follow the strictest code and then be ready to bloom from that foundation. So within the ADA, what you really need is to ensure that services, programs, and activities are accessible to individuals with disabilities. Seems simple. In existing facilities, public accommodations must remove barriers when removal is readily achievable. We're going to look at some of the language within the ADA. It is nuanced. It allows actually for a lot of limber interpretations. But again, our goal is equitable participation, no matter where you are and who you are. How can you really create at your institutions that belonging vibe? And I think using the ADA legislation as a launching pad for that equitable vibe is really one that is, as in the last slide on this cartoon, liberation. Within the ADA, the phrase integrated settings is part of it, meaning the goal is to have everyone doing the same thing at the same time. There may be accommodations needed, there may be modified services, but the goal is everyone's in it together. Meaning you can't have a specific program or a special program for special people. Now, that being said, there are specific programs for specific people. When you've got a dance program for people with Parkinson's, or you're doing a museum tour in language. But the goal of the ADA is integration. And the idea is that you can't exclude people from disabilities from wanting or not even wanting to, but from participating in your program if you're able to make that happen. And that's the goal. We want to be thinking about the ADA as the asset-based foundation of our equity work. And sometimes when we're thinking about modifications or adaptations, we get lost in technology anxiety or we're focused on the ramp. But sometimes it can be very simple. And you really want to be looking at, you may not own your facility, you may be a street fair, you might be a dance group that moves from organization to organization. But when thinking about physical access, you really want to be thinking about not only how do you get in through the door, what's the sidewalk like out front? Is there parking for my van? Those sorts of things, but all the way to lighting and acoustics in the space, where the emergency exits and is egress accessible to someone if they might be using a wheelchair. Think about the heights of tables, countertops. If you're selling food from a truck and I'm a wheelchair user, is there an alternative to that high bar that is usually high for someone standing? But if I'm seated, how do you adapt that surface? So there's a lot of things to think about. And as always, I always like to say the first step really just implies the second step. Incremental to get it right is sort of a rallying cry here at the council, because what we're looking for is consistent improvement. And as I said, and some of those accommodations may not be as complicated as you think. It could be writing things down with a pencil and paper. It could be texting and email as opposed to an audio phone call. We know that fidget toys are certainly part of different education programs for kids with autism, but we found now that even in office meetings, toys and things to sort of help your brain work at multiple things at the same time actually assist us as we're absorbing information. So this is a list of just a few of the accommodations that you might be considering when you're creating an event, you're looking at your institution. Now, as I said, the language within the ADA can be quite nuanced. Integrated settings was the first practice, and that really gets us looking at the physical environments that we're creating or that we're working in. Another phrase, which I think is super important, is effective communication. Again, that's a broadly defined phrase, but I bring this up because I want to remind us that not only is it addressed in the law that the covered entity, the organization, must communicate effectively with individuals with disabilities or their companions, And that means that a simple text isn't going to be wholly effective. On this slide, I provided a number of graphics that are used often to let people quickly know that uh, our facility is wheelchair accessible, that we provide ASL interpretation or ASL language programs for people who may be ASL users and are deaf. Um, Using multimodal ways to not only share what you offer, but to allow folks to choose whether they'd like to participate. The act of disclosure, having to let you know that I have specific needs, can be exhausting. And so, as much as possible, you want the viewer, the patron, the intern, the new volunteer to know who you are and how do you communicate that through text, through image, through video. This multimodal way is what is going to be most effective. And the website, being probably your center of info, is super important. And I believe that we're going to see another ADA update based on websites. Now, I provide the resource at the end, but I think this is super important. Websites, of course, are our new front doors. And if you can't get into the front door, how are you going to make me feel that I belong there, that I'm invited in, and that I'm a participant in your program or offering? So the web content accessibility guidelines, which you can find on the web, are key for really looking at your website, the scaffolding, the framework, the pieces of alt text behind photos, captions within videos. These are all measured out and have guidelines to make your websites more accessible. Like any contractor job, I may not know all the details, but I know the right questions to ask to ensure my web designer or my web coder update is achieving the goals that I want to be an accessible website. When thinking about web access, the guidelines talk about robust content, perceivable information, operable interface, and understandable information and operations. Again, these can be nuanced language pieces, but it isn't just wordsmithing. It really is about creating the scaffolding and the framework behind the web, as well as the pieces of the site that you have up front and visible, accessible to the widest range of users. Now, within the ADA, it also does address assistive listening system. So that's the current ADA. Websites are the future of what's coming down, and why not anticipate that? But there are some things that are actually embedded within the ADA. Some of those have to do with parking, and in this case, assistive listening systems. So if you have a place of assembly that has microphoned sound and reserved seating, or even general seating, you need to have these assisted listening devices, these ALDs. It's part of the law. Movie theaters have them. You can check, but it's a percentage, meaning how many seats you have will indicate how many of these ALDs that you should have on scale, on site. The thing to remember that these assistive listening devices amplify the sound. So amplification is not going to solve all hearing functional limitations. That's important to remember because you can't just assume someone wants it, but you want to make sure they know you have it. And so that's when we go back into effective communication. Do you have the logo? Is it something that's mentioned in your thank you for coming email that you have these? You want to make sure you have them. You want to communicate effectively that they're available, but you don't want to make assumptions about who might want them. Within the 2010 modifications to the ADA, ticketing was a big deal. So if you have box office services, and I'll provide a link at the end, you really want to review the law around ticketing. The gist is that a person who may need specific features of ADA seating need to be able to purchase those tickets the way anyone else does. If you've got price sections, there should be ADA seating within that section. If you are selling tickets through a secondary outlet, ADA seating needs to be available within that secondary outlet as well. Now, there is guidance within the law. We recognize, Boston is filled with all these old theaters, and so many of them don't have balconies that are accessible because there's no elevator. So what do you do if you're running the box office to provide the same equitable purchase points, price tickets, regional seating, etc., to the person who may need the features of ADA seating? That's something that you need to ensure that you have a policy and a practice for. Service animals are part of 1990 ADA, and of course, I could probably do a whole session on service animals. People love talking about them. A reminder that a service animal is defined as a dog trained to perform work tasks. Training is the key thing. There is no certificate or outfit or vest, although I will tell you many of my friends who have service dogs will put a vest on them to avoid the kind of commentary that can come up with people who are curious, or for people who feel like they're going to stand up for the rights of other folks and perhaps they don't have all the correct knowledge. So this is a dog that is trained, doesn't need a certificate. It might not even be trained by an organization. The dog could be trained by an individual, but training is key, because like a child, if the service animal is out of control, you can ask them to move on. But otherwise, the person with the service animal is allowed into any space that any other participant may be. What's important to also note is that within the ADA, emotional support animals, ESAs, are not covered within the ADA. I know Massachusetts has housing and it supports ESAs, but you as an organization, you as an individual creating an environment that you want to be as accessible to everyone as possible, you need to make a decision about what your policy is around ESAs. I know that you just want to make that clear, because what you don't want is someone showing up at the door and being turned away, because that is a bad vibe. One last thing about service animals. If you're curious, you can't ask a person about their disability. You can ask two questions, but if it's gotten to the point where you're asking these two questions, you really want to sort of check where you are in this process and why you're asking them, because obviously now we've got a question about trust. But legally, you can ask two questions. Is the animal a service animal? And what is the task the animal has been trained to provide? Mobility devices. The famous, infamous Blue Bob, as it's called. This is the international symbol of disability. Of course, not everyone with a disability uses a wheelchair, but it was a very successful icon. And it's the header for our mobility devices. Within the ADA, wheelchairs must be permitted in all areas open to pedestrian use. It's that simple. The hard part is that this also includes other power-driven mobility devices. So that could be the Segway, that could be the large motorized wheelchair, which again comes with its own weight issues. But it's a reminder that you can't prevent people who are using wheeled devices or other power-driven mobility devices from your event or institution. That's key. So covering some of the language, integrated settings, effective communication. We know that accommodations that you provide are to be reasonable. How that gets defined could be of question. But I think the best place is to start if you haven't already started. And when I think about the first considerations to really getting yourself going is to, one, appoint a person. Now, it may not be their sole job. You may have to wear many hats. But if you have an access coordinator, someone who's taking in new information, making sure that the departments are aware of what's happening. Again, this idea of being both iterative, I'm anticipating human variety, but also responsive. Someone's come to the door and they need something specific. And within that, important to remember that if you do have a defined access coordinator, you want them to be easily found on the website. It's not a trick. It shouldn't be a secret. It should be easily found. You want to make sure that you have an access plan. Now, an access plan, oh gosh, one more plan. It should be tied to your strategic plan or your business plan. It's the content of what you're doing, what you want to do in 6 months to a year, what you hope to do down the pike in 3 or 4 years. It's a living document. And it's not as scary as it needs to be. In fact, we'll have resources at the end because locally, the council and Open Door Arts have been working together to not only create a digital self-assessment tool, which is a way to sort of help you evaluate where you might be, but also they provide formats for access plans so that, again, the plan gives you a sense of direction. Within any plan, you always want to plan for modification or plan for pivots. But if you have that living document about where you are and where you want to go, that's huge. So access coordinator, access plan. You really want to make sure you have a grievance procedure. It can be complicated or simple, but really what it's rooting at is this idea of a responsive organization so that if I have something good or bad that I want to say, where do I go? How can I reach to you? How can I either ask for a modification or have you review something that I've noted? So a grievance procedure, again, can be simple or complicated, but it's really rooted in being a responsive organization. And then last but not least, the non-discrimination statement. Many of us have these non-discrimination statements that we post when we're looking to hire. It's often connected to employment. I challenge you to think about how do you actually enact or embody that non-discrimination statement? What's intentional? It's not just something to put out there. It's not performative. It's a real, what's the real embodiment of that statement? Oh, and here's Open Door Art. So I knew I had them coming up. We are really working closely with them to develop this self-assessment tool. It's free, it's comprehensive, it has a lot of questions, but you can, start it, pause, save it, start it, pause, save it. But it provides such a great framework for really understanding where you might be. And again, it's self-assessment. It's not for me. It's not for Open Door Arts. It really is for you to use as a way to strengthen your actions. The self-assessment was designed with people with disabilities, so it's really centered on best practices, and the tools itself are accessible. It touches on the 5 key areas: organizational approach, space, services, communication, and programming. Really worth checking out, and I do provide the link at the end. It'll spit you out a report, and also, again, as I said, provide templates for developing that access plan. Now, I'd like to include, we've talked about people, and again, I'm no doctor, and we've talked about the legal, and I'm no lawyer. We've talked about first steps because, that's the teacher in me. But I also want to address inclusion by design or universal design. Um, Design is at the basis of everything that we create. And the idea is with the anticipation, because you understand humans come in a variety of body shapes, sizes, and abilities. By the anticipation of that variety, can I design an environment that's usable by all people or to the maximum or the greatest extent of people without having to adapt it afterwards? As I said, it's always much easier in the design phase to erase something in pencil than to try to modify something that's already in concrete. And so I like to look at the standards as developed by Edward Steinfeld at the up at the University of Buffalo when thinking about, again, the environments we're designing, the programs we design, the productions we design, the galleries we design, the landscapes we design. Think about how these 8 goals might fit into that. Body fit. How does my body fit into this? I think about that when I get into my tiny, very tiny Volkswagen, how my head hits the door, but once I land, oh, I've adjusted that seat to fit my body very comfortably. And comfort is also part of these goals. Don't want to have to be stressful to participate or involve myself. Awareness and understanding are like the website, that idea of it's not a test. I want to know how things work and how it can easily work for me. What I like about Steinfeld's goals, it also talks about wellness. We don't want to be contributing to harm. We want to be contributing to individual and community wellness. Social integration, again, I often like to say disability is plural. In America, we've got this idea sometimes that it's all about the individual, the manifest destiny of the individual. If I'll just pull up my bootstraps, I'll be fine. This movement reminds us that we're interconnected, that interdependence. Now, that doesn't take away my self-agency. It doesn't take away, my self-determination, but that social integration is key for success. We're not doing this alone. Personalization, that's my phone. I've got it set just the way I need to. Can the environments that you're creating, again, be realized by my needs specifically? At the beginning of this webinar, I was like, take care of yourselves as best you can to remain fully engaged. I'm putting the power in you to take care of yourselves within this learning moment. And I also think cultural appropriateness is so important. Disability as a class of people was defined by the ADA, but not everybody defines themselves in that manner. So you really want to ask, you don't want to assume, and it's how different cultures address disability, whether it's level of inclusion or exclusion. You want to be aware of that and not just come in as an American helicopter with, ADA laws. A couple of things that I think are, again, part of the first steps. Staff education and training. Most affordable thing you can do. It's a constant and should be part of onboarding new staff, new volunteers. If you can shift the attitude, that's a huge shift. People with disabilities sometimes get infantilized, talked down to, or talked louder to. So you want to check your biases and really work on the attitude of your staff to create that welcoming vibe. Now, I'm going to chat briefly about people first language. And again, this is different. It's kind of a default position. So rather than saying disabled person, I would say person with a disability. It's putting the person first before, quote unquote, the condition. Um, that being said, that's sort of the default, more, as I put this under etiquette, a starting point. Because as you get to know people and you understand, okay, these may be my pronouns, and actually my identity is as a blind photographer. It isn't a photographer who's blind. So that's language is also so nuanced. And what's great about the Open Door Arts tools is they have provided a glossary. And that glossary really will help us so that we're all speaking, quote unquote, the same language when thinking about disability and access. But when thinking about an identity and thinking about a person, I like to say people first is the way to begin. Um, and language is ever changing. You know, the word handicapped is totally out. It's an old word, still used, I know, in parking. But it is, you know, cap in hand. It's begging. It's not the pride of the current disability justice movement. So disability is the word to say. That is something that I hear over and over and over. And to avoid using derogatory or ableist terms. I only put a few here. I don't like to spend a lot of time on them, but it's a reminder that language is ever changing, and we really want to use the language that is the most respectful and is tied to ultimately liberation politics. One of the key things around the environments that you're designing is what is the info that you can provide that will get me off the couch? So again, it has to be effective. So effective could be not only are you listing the different resources that you have, so I know that I'll be comfortable, but you want to use the language, again, that's going to get me off the couch. If I don't know where to park, if I don't know if you have food that's going to fit my diet, if I don't know if you have an accessible restroom, I'm not going to go. I don't want to have to call you and ask you about the toilet. Can you effectively communicate that in an email or an information provided once I'm considering going? You want to think about the basics. We're back to that sort of basic triangle: parking, food, restrooms. If I have a service animal, do you have a place for my service animal waste? So think broadly about, again, what's going to get me off the couch? I could stay at home and watch Netflix, but what are you creating that's so engaging? I've got to get off the couch. As a reminder, and this is just one of those little side things, when we're calling this a know before you go or a social narrative, the phrase social story is a copywritten phrase, and it's specifically rooted in IEPs, individual education plans. So no shame to Carol Gray for grabbing that, but as a reminder, this might be a social narrative to get me off the couch, but it's not a social story, which is specifically used in IEPs for young people. And so I kind of, you know, we got certainly time for Q&A, but to wrap this around our heads is to, again, be thinking big. We know there are laws about inclusion, that people with disabilities need to be invited in and provided the modification and adaptations they may need to fully participate. And even with that anticipation of human variety, you want to still be responsive to folks and have the vehicle to respond to folks who may need something new and different. This work is never a one and done deal. There's always going to be additional needs. The goal is to create a nimble environment that can respond to different requests. You can't make assumptions about one type, one condition of disability. As people say, if you've met one blind person, you've met one blind person. So you want to get beyond this idea that this is going to serve all people who are blind, or this will serve all people who use wheelchairs. That's not the case. But you do want to effectively communicate what you have and to be sure that people who may be, quote unquote, knocking on the door know who to ask if they need a specific adaptation. So, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. I shouldn't laugh at that, but I'm not a lawyer. But don't wait for a situation to get legal before thinking about it. Your access coordinator, your access plan, your grievance procedure, your embodiment of a non-discrimination policy. These are all the foundations for really creating an equitable, welcoming environment. The list here is really not to forget some of these crucial things. Don't forget emergency preparedness. You can have a great event, but if the person in the wheelchair can't get out during an emergency, that's not so good. Think about how you market and promote your events. Or how can you effectively invite other people with disabilities into your event? Are you ready for if they show up at the door without a reservation? Think about the digital as well as print collateral that you create. There are a number of methods when thinking about font and kerning and justification that are more accessible than others. How this gets tied into your marketing and are you effectively communicating that? These are all connected. Don't forget about food allergies. So if you are if you're serving food, to really be thinking about that. And as I mentioned before, is the counter that serves the food high, low, multi-level? So if I'm a chair user or short person, can I still use it? I also would encourage you to think about the personal assistant. So in many cases, and again, this is where I say disability is plural. The personal assistant, the personal care assistant is the accommodation that allows some people to get out of bed. And so if you've got them coming to your event, are you charging them? Something to think about. And how are you responding to accommodation requests? Are you able to respond to them, or do they become a moment of alarm or concern? You should be ready for accommodation requests. And like always, you should be ready for complaints. And don't root the complaint in shame, but rather think about the complaint as an opportunity to learn. Yes, you can tell I was a teacher of young people for many years, but it stands. A complaint is an opportunity to learn and improve. So within all of this, it's a reminder that human functional limitation becomes disabling at the intersection of the individual and her environment. I'm no doctor. I can't diagnose a condition. That's not my job. I'm in charge of the environments that I create for my cultural institution, my cultural event. And if disability happens at that intersection, what can I do to ensure that by design, I'm as inclusive as possible and always improving? So I like this picture because, of course, in outer space, we're all disabled. And it's about civil rights. So although I like to root this in asset-based conditions, asset-based considerations, don't be fearful of the law. Think about how this improves your organization. But that being said, it is still rooted in civil rights law. And this image by Tom Olin, taken in the 90s, is from the Capitol Crawl, where people who used wheelchairs got out of their chairs and crawled up the Capitol steps to make their point that we want to be included. 2008, when they were talking about getting rid of affordable health care, who was in the offices of the legislature, once again being pulled from their wheelchairs? These were disability activists. This is about civil rights. a number of resources here, which we'll make available to all of you. The NEA, of course, has a great access department and a number of forms you can download. We are lucky here in Massachusetts to be the home of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, an international design organizations with monthly webinars and conversations, a fantastic library of resources. They are the host for the New England ADA Center. I subscribe to their newsletter. Not that every newsletter pertains to me, but it's great to hear what litigation might be coming down the pike. We're also, of course, with all the education industries that we have in town from Harvard and beyond, Universal Design for Learning, which was started at Harvard out of David Rose works at Harvard, really looks at methods for learning that I think are relevant beyond whether or not you're a teacher. Open Door Arts, I mentioned before, we're working with them on the culture accessibility self-assessment tools. Definitely check those out. I'm giving you the link for the Web Consortium accessibility guidelines. That's for your coder. I have a hard time with that page. Send that to your web designer. A lot of the offices in Massachusetts provide a lot of resources. Mass Office of Disability is actually doing a lot more training these days, so really worthwhile checking them out. Both the commissions for deaf and hard of hearing and for the blind will actually pay for internships. And so when I didn't even get into employment laws, which is a whole nother thing, really just focused on patronage today. But if you want to make sure that you're really walking the walk, the commissions will pay for interns. I've included the Mass Autism Commission as well as Mass Ability, which used to be Mass Rehab, for folks who have had a big change of life. That idea of not all disabilities are permanent, not all disabilities are you born with, but they can be acquired by living a life. Few more things to look at. The Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts does a wonderful conference. The LEAD conference is really an administrators conference, leadership exchange in arts and disability. TDF, the Theater Development Fund, has a bunch of resources and some grants. Fact sheet on ticketing, because again, if you have a place of assembly where you are selling tickets, you really want to be aware of what the rules are around that. I've included Easter Seals. They have a great film challenge. They also have a lender's library, which I have found very helpful personally, just to understand the tools that are out there. It's too hard to keep track of what MIT is doing. The Easter Seals Library of Technology can help with that. And then a great organization that's local, the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity. Can't say enough about them. And that is the session. Hey, with 10 minutes left. If we're able to answer your questions now, great. But do take a look at this. I'm available all the time. Your tax dollars at work. My email is charles.baldwin@mass.gov. And that was a whirlwind of information. And now is the Q&A time.
Hi, Charles. This is Sarah.
Hi,
And
Sarah.
we do not currently have any questions in the Q&A.
I was so comprehensive, I
You
covered
were
everything.
so comprehensive. It's great. Just want to point out that there is some stuff in the chat, lots of great links that Kaylin shared from your presentation. Also a little information. Open Door Arts appears to be having some website challenges, but has provided a direct link to the assessment, and they are solving the website stuff. So grab the URL and go ahead and save that and just try it out later. And just to let everyone know that we will be sending out the presentation for folks afterwards, and that will include the links. There is a question, Charles, about the up designation. And
All
What's going
righty.
on?
Well, that's a doozy. So back in 2015, the Mass Cultural Council started an application for organizations who were either doing the good work or interested, how do I get there? And that was the UP initiative, the Universal Participation Initiative. That ran for 7 years. There's about 100 organizations that are part of this community of practice. However, the UP program was paused in 23, with the idea being rather than having a special community doing special work, that we were going to embed this work throughout the council and all of its grantees. So we had a fairly soft launch, but it has launched in August for the council's Deaf and Disability Equity Plan. It addresses our internal work. How can we make our staff, our interns, make sure that they're being accommodated in the way that they need to? And our director of operations, Kathy, has done a great job with that. How we steward this across the cultural sector, meaning the grantees, that's what we're doing now. So although the UP initiative doesn't really exist anymore, we're trying to get everyone who gets a grant to be designated. The logo of the Mass Cultural Council should stand for "You are welcome here." That's my goal anyway. That's a long answer for whoever asked that question. And I'm happy
Right.
to chat offline further.
Great. And we do have a bunch of questions now. So, um, if some historic spaces are wheelchair accessible and others or not, does that create segmented or special places? So what does that mean for for a
Right.
space?
So you've got a historic site, and the first floor is wheelchair accessible. The doors are wide enough. There's no great big threshold at the door jamb. There's a restroom that's accessible, but you can't go up the old colonial stairs. That's a truism. So two things. One, make sure that I know that the second floor is inaccessible before I get there. So I don't show up and be like, oh, nobody told me. And the other is with the rise of the kind of technology that we have, we know that you don't necessarily need to be physically in the space to check the space out. Obviously, optimal would be I get to go with my grandma and my nephew into the same space at the same time. But if not, can we go up with a tablet that shows grandma how nephew and I are enjoying the space, what we have, my pithy commentary, so that again, she feels like she's part of it. And if you don't have the tablet, can I just use my phone to FaceTime at the same time? So think about creative ways that might be able to give me access. Um, Gore Place out in Waltham has a wonderful model of the building. So although you can't get up to the second and third floors, they've got those colonial stairs I was talking about, but they have a model of the building. And so it gives you a chance, like a dollhouse, to see what's what and how cramped the service quarters were. I think those are on the third floor. So,
Uh, Another question from somebody in the Q&A. How might an organization go about determining what ALDs may be appropriate for their assembly space?
oh, um, well, right. First, check out the number that you'll need. And I would work with a sound engineer to be specific, because what makes a this is what makes ALDs complicated. This is why you want to make sure you get the right sound engineer to help you, because based on whether I have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, there are ALDs that will connect to a, a radio wave, to I'm missing the language when I think about it, but there are different ways. So to determine what would be best for your place of assembly where you are selling seats for people to gather, um, start with the sound person. I was at Wheelock Family Theater for many years, and we worked with high output most of the time.
Great. There's a question
Oh,
here.
and
Oh,
something to
sorry.
remember, and I just want to go on this.
Thank you.
There are times that so I've been working closely with historic New England and these getting some of these answers because what I found is that a lot of historic sites feel like they're exempt from the ADA, but that's not true. There's this idea of like, oh, we're grandfathered in. That's not true. Um, we know that if you remain static and change nothing, you can quote get by. But I'm sure you've added bathrooms and you probably added electric lights. So this idea that you are exempt is a falsehood. And it's really important to note that. So how you achieve access may not be because I built an elevator, but there are methods that you can do to create more access than what you have. And be sure to have that on your website so I don't show up at the front door not even able to get in. But don't think that you're exempt. You need to be, and this is where you get into what modifications can you make that are reasonable? And reasonable is going to vary by context. And in historic sites, you're not exempt, and that's I think important to remember. I run into that a lot, which is why I work closely with historic New England to figure out some of these solutions.
Great. There's a question. Do you need to be a member of Easter Seals to borrow materials? I'm not quite clear on
Oh, for
this.
their lending library. Well, you
Okay.
probably
Do you
need
have
to
to be
be
a
a person
member?
with a disability to go for their lending library. But I just went in to have a conversation with them. There's one in Boston, and I think the lending library is and I think they have one in Western Mass too. But I just went in and talked to, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember his name, to get an idea of what the tools were, so that there's so much happening with the phone that is supporting people who are blind. New technology all the time. Um, Staying on top of that can be really tough. As I said in the presentation, originally I was like trying to track MIT and all their inventions, but I found checking with Easter Seals in their library, they've already done testing. So they may not have all the highfalutin fancy stuff, but they're going to have some tried and true. So it's worth a conversation to find out what are people using. Now, for a while, I was talking to libraries to see if they would become sort of like, because you can rent tools or not rent tools, but check out tools at the library. Are libraries an opportunity for assistive technology? Perhaps. But I do know that assistive technology can start running up. So start thinking about partners and regional partners, people who might want to use the same equipment as you have.
Great. Well, that is all the questions that we have in the Q&A. So thank you very
Well,
much.
there's sure to be more questions brewing. As I said, there always are. I'm available at any time through charles.baldwin@mass.gov. I'm no legal scholar, I'm an enthusiast, so it's all about finding the solution and happy to work with any of you to help you with that. Um, Thank you all very much for coming to this session. We'll be having future sessions, so keep us on your radar and enjoy the afternoon. Thanks everyone for coming.